All right. So welcome everyone to TDM23 Unveiled. Today we will take our first step in shaping the future of modeling. My name is Marty Melkowitz. I'm the Director of Modeling Analytics, and I'm going to take you through this unveiling. But before we do, I would like to introduce the Executive Director of the Boston Region MPO, Tegan Tyke, to give us some welcome remarks. Tegan.
Thank you, Marty, and welcome everybody. Marty humors me and lets me say a few things at the beginning of this meeting because this is actually a really exciting meeting and moment in time for me, and I will explain why. I hope you're also excited. I took on my role as Executive Director of the staff to the Boston Region MPO about 4 years ago. And when I was going through the process of interviewing, deciding I wanted to take on this job, I talked a lot about developing a strategic direction for the agency. And one big component of that was to think about the tools that this agency maintains and uses, and really thinking through the strategic direction of those tools as well. And the travel demand model is a kind of an elephant in that space. It is a big, complex, and very important tool. So one of the reasons why I was really wanting to think carefully about how we develop and use tools is that as a public agency, we are using public funds to create these tools. We are also creating them with a public-facing mission, which is to support the creation of a modern and well-maintained transportation system. And so as such, our tools should also be modern and well-maintained. And as a public agency, we should also be really focused on being transparent and ensuring that the work that we're doing really is in service to both the agencies that we work with, but also all of the stakeholders that we work with and who are influenced by decisions that are made partly as an outcome of travel demand modeling outputs, right? They're influenced by those tools that we use. So when I started here, we had this very robust travel demand modeling tools. But at the time, our model was to sort of develop, maintain, and apply the model all sort of in one big package and internally to the agency. And I can understand completely why that was our approach at the time. I think it sort of ensures consistency of application and interpretation of a really complex tool. But I really wanted to think through whether that was the best model for us as an agency and in support of the partners that we work with. Partly also because so much of our attention and time as an agency was really focused on the applications work, and we didn't have as much space and time, I think, to be real thought leaders in the field and advancing the modeling field. So we pivoted and began working with staff here, and Marty really stepped up and led the development in partnership with the rest of staff and key stakeholders to develop new travel demand modeling tools. And they are exciting because they are very well documented and they are designed in support of transparency. And that is what I am so excited about, kind of aspects of this today. So I just want to say that I'm very excited for this. I do believe that this framework is going to really enhance our ability to collaborate with the modeling community. It's going to open us up to really important feedback to help us improve and further advance the tools. And it's also going to give us space and time to really work with you all and focus on being leaders in the field and kind of really thought leaders and working with you as a community to do really effective things with these really amazing tools. So with that level of enthusiasm, I'd like to turn it back to Marty to walk us through the presentation.
Thank you very much, Tegan. Great how refreshing. Today we're going to talk about the elephant in the room. But thanks very much for that welcome. I think you really put together quite succinctly what we're aiming to cover today. And now I'll just take the next 40 minutes or so and say the same thing with more words, but same message. So we're going to dive in, but before we do, I just want to sort of put this presentation into context of future presentations and materials that you can expect to receive and be a part of. So this is the unveiling. This is the initial unveiling. We promise we're not going to pull the veil back over and this is the only glimpse you'll get of TDM23. This is just meant to be that first introduction and walkthrough. But we did want to only sort of do an invitation for this particular presentation because we wanted to limit it to people who are informed stakeholders of travel demand modeling so that we could get right to a bit of the details, a bit of the meat. Obviously, we don't have enough time to go through the entire model in great detail. There will be a future session that does exactly that. So you can all sort of self-select based on this presentation and whether you want to participate in that future one. We're also going to go the other way and make things more accessible to those who aren't necessarily as informed around travel demand modeling. So also look forward to that to come. But more to hear in the future. What we're going to do today is start off with a bit of a background and an overview of TDM23. What was our motivation, what we set out to do, how we did it. And then we're just going to keep iterating through and getting into more and more details around the model. I really want to pack as much real information into this meeting as possible. And then we're going to close out this talking about the next steps and sort of how we will be proceeding to realize Tegan's vision of CTPS as that cornerstone of the modeling community and really bringing that together and improving our planning process. And we will have time at the end for Q&A, but I'll just say that for questions, I'll be wanting to really discuss the ones that are at the level of this presentation. You may have many questions about details, and we want to talk about those, but we can either take those offline or, like I said, those will be covered in future presentations. But please keep a list, and happy to keep talking about this. So let's dive in. So first off, why TDM23? What does that mean? Well, the reason that the MPO maintains a travel demand model and updated their travel demand model is for the LRTP. So this year, we were happy to produce our latest LRTP, Destination 2050. So, and TDM23 was used to generate many of the metrics in support of that evaluation of our plan. So this is also why we call it TDM23. It's the travel demand model for the 2023 LRTP, so TDM23. The previous model is therefore referred to as TDM19, our previous LRTP. The next will be TDM27, and so on. So we have the new LRTP, but we also have a lot of new data. I mean, of course, we have updates to our roadway and transit networks, what projects should be included in our future year plans, but also we have new projections for the socioeconomic data, socioeconomic conditions. And this is really exciting because MAPC has also adopted a new allocation model for socioeconomic data. It's in the UrbanSim platform. And so rather than giving us zonal level totals, household population, marginal distributions of those, a few employment sectors, they're giving us a much richer data set. Disaggregate persons with their households associated with them at the block or the zone level. And I've included here, so like I said, I want to get into some real data, real information. So here are the attributes from UrbanSim for the person table that TDM23 takes advantage of. So you see there's some person level, their age, whether or not they're a worker, if they're a worker, what's the income of that worker, but then also rolled up to the household level. Then employment side, the TDM19 worked with 3 employment sectors. Now we have 10. We want to take advantage of those 10 sectors. So this really drove us towards a more fundamental, rethink of what the travel demand model could be and should be. And then the other things, we had new needs. I mean, this is part of the LRTP process. Every 4 years, new questions come up, new needs, new concerns. Obviously, work from home behavior is one of the primary concerns, but also just general uncertainty around our future projections. So how can we best support those? And a new travel demand model, it was the right tool for that, the right step. So how did we go about developing it? Well, the first step we took was to be very intentional about engaging stakeholders for guidance and then going through a design process with those stakeholders. So with that in mind, we created a model steering committee. It's been going for about 3 years now, has members from CTPS across the agency, the planning groups, the application groups. We have Len Diggins, who's the chair of the RTAC and a member of our MPO board. We have a representative from MAPC and a representative from MassDOT OTP. So this group has been meeting together every 6 weeks to 2 months for the last 3 years and just reviewing designs, making decisions, moving forward TDM23. We also drew on the big ideas, motivating questions. So this was an outreach effort during the formulation of the last LRTP. And we talked to the modelers that were working with TDM19 and understood their pain points and what would help them do their job better. So then from that, we defined our requirements and went into the process, and we recognized with, as I said, the new data, the new needs, and this guidance and this design, we decided a fundamental rebuild of the model was necessary. So that's what was done. Almost virtually every parameter in the model has been re-estimated. often going back to, not super recent data, the 2011 household survey, but still re-estimated so that we would know exactly and could document exactly where these numbers came from. The network has been refactored. It's still, a lot of the same line layer, but it's been simplified where it could be, and we've restructured the attributes and added some new categories. But I can say every line of code in TDM23 is new and has been designed from the ground up. So what is it? What is it that we built? So these are, I think, some of the key questions. I thought I'd knock those out before we get into any more detail. So one of the first questions that came up, and thinking back to those early days of the steering committee, the first things that we sort of worked through, is this a statewide model or is this a regional model? If we go back, I think it's around 2016, there were two separate models. CTPS maintained a regional model and MassDOT maintained a statewide model. And going back to 2016, those two were fused together and it became a single model platform. So with the update, it really challenged us, like, what are we building here? And so what I'll say is, this is a regional model with a statewide extent. So it has the same geographic extent as the previous statewide model, all of Massachusetts, southeastern New Hampshire, all of Rhode Island. But if you look at the components of the model, it's much more typical of a regional travel demand model. It has a lot of detail around transit, but it doesn't include some things that you may see in a statewide model, such as commodity flow model components, as well as a long distance component. Massachusetts is a small state, so it sort of balances that, but just wanted to define what we're building here. Excuse me. Yeah, I'm just anticipating this next question. This is a big one, certainly for my my former colleagues and what I did as a consultant at Cambridge Systematics. What kind of model did we build? Is it trip-based or is it activity-based? I want to preface my answer by acknowledging that for MPOs our size, an activity-based model is the state of the practice. I'm not debating that point. However, based on the data we had, the age of the data that these models were estimated from, the capacity we had to develop a new model and maintain it, and the needs that were identified by the stakeholders, is probably the most important thing to consider when designing and building any kind of model or tool to support a decision-making process. The trip-based model was the right tool for the job. And not only that, it actually had an advantage over activity-based in that it runs faster. And one of the things we're really excited about doing with TDM23 is conducting more of an exploratory modeling analysis. I'll talk a bit more about that later on. The next question, is this open source? The answer is no, and yes. It is in Transcad. You require Transcad version 9 to run the entire model from start to end. However, we really wanted to, as much as we could, make this more accessible, a more accessible platform. And open source programming can make that available, as well as the file storage. So what we've done is the first few components of it, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when you see the whole component stack, but vehicle availability, trip generation, those are implemented in Python. So those could be run without Transcad. And on the other side, on the post processors and visualizations, we've done as much as that as we could also in Python or other open source software that will be shared as part of this model platform. So it is open source in that sense, although we really, it made sense to use Transcad for what it's so good at, managing the matrices and running assignments. So then the last question, what should be the base here? This last 4-year time period, or 3 years that we've been developing the model, has been probably one of the biggest years, certainly in my career, of travel behavior change. So pre or post pandemic. Now, 2019 is the base year of the model. So yes, definitely pre-pandemic. However, the assumption that we can transfer that travel behavior to 2050 could be challenged based on what we're seeing right now and how people are changing their travel behavior. So although it's a pre-pandemic base year, we do feel like it's a structure that can evolve, and developing sort of a near post-pandemic updated base year is something we do have on our short list of development ideas for the future. So let's get into a little bit more detail about how this model works and what's in it. So I want to start off with showing the relationship between UrbanSim and TDM23. UrbanSim, again, is that socioeconomic land use allocation model. So UrbanSim takes in the control totals that were developed, the projections at the MPO level, as well as zoning information and accessibility, and it produces that very rich disaggregate population and the 10 sectors of employment at the block level. That's then passed into TDM23 along with information like enrollment and the networks, of course, and other direct trip inputs. And then TDM23 estimates the demand aspect, the travel demand, the supply side conditions, does some post-processing as needed around air quality and equity. And then those network conditions can be fed back to UrbanSim and updated. So we can sort of see this feedback loop between the socioeconomic allocation and the accessibility and conditions on our networks. So if we look into a little bit more detail on TDM23 itself, here is the stack of model components. So first off, I want to orient you by kind of what the different stacks are, those vertical stacks. So these are organized by trip type. So you see the household trips on the left, that has the most steps to it. And then university travel, airport, ground access travel, and trucks and externals. So the first thing that might jump out at you is that, as I mentioned, household has the most steps in it, and vehicle availability and work from home are only related to household trips. The other steps all start with a trip generation and then proceed. And you'll notice also that trucks and externals don't have a time period step, meaning that those are distributed at the daily level. Some other things I want to highlight here when we're special generators are coming into the household step at generation. In other words, they're not sensitive to vehicle availability or work from home. Then when we get into distribution, we're in our feedback loop with assignment. So after we've distributed our trips and done the mode choice estimates, split them by time of day, we can assign both on the highway side and transit for transit parking capacity. So capacity limitations at parking ride lots. And then those conditions can be fed back to distribution and iterated until convergence. And then I did just kind of sneak in on this slide the time periods for TDM23. There are 4 time periods: AMs between 6:30 and 9:30, PMs from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. Then we have midday and overnight. It's probably a little more detailed from the slide, but I couldn't find another place for that. So, and I definitely want to let everyone know the time periods. It's a pretty important part of the model. So now let's get into a bit more details. I'm going to layer in on that stack. Are we good? Oh, thanks. Yeah. So talking about the inputs and the process of modeling with those inputs and the outputs that are produced, one of the most important inputs are the networks, and of course the roadway network is one of the biggest ones. So here, the message I want to communicate is this new category that we have defined for our roadway links, and that's the facility type. So this is in addition to functional class, which was the previous main category. And I've just kind of drawn on this map the freeways, expressways, and major arterials, just to give you a sense of what those definitions look like for our area. So freeways are all interstates, including Route 3 and 24, expressways the next level down, Route 2 for a good part of it, and the major arterials below that. But the point I want to make here too is we're abstracting our roadway into these facility types, and then that with the number of lanes, with the free flow speed, and with whether or not it's in the urbanized area, that is how the capacity and delay parameters are defined for the roadway network. So when thinking about using this model, these are essentially the parameters you have to deal with and to play with. Things can be set directly, but in general, this is how the model operates. Then we're looking at transit. The abstraction here is by transit mode or submode. So these are generally defined by the vehicle type, whether it's bus or train, light rail versus heavy rail. Also some things about the service or the fare. So we've distinguished local buses from express buses. And then we've also distinguished by operator in some cases, MBTA, non-MBTA, just for convenience in defining fares and other parameters. So using these modes, we can set the fare at the mode level or at the route level as necessary for the RTAs, for example. We can define how transfers are allowed or there are penalties between them. And if necessary, we could even set weights on the time. So if we say traveling by commuter rail is so comfortable compared to a local bus, that could be discounted through these mode definitions. Other than that, transit, of course, there's the route alignment and the stop location. Then we have the headways by those 4 times a day, and the travel times are either derived from the roadway conditions or they can be set directly in the network. And that, in a sense, is transit and how it's represented in the model. So then the third network input is for bicycling and pedestrian. This is derived from OpenStreetMap. Essentially, we fetched OpenStreetMap, removed all non-walk bike facilities. So here looking at downtown Boston, you'll notice you don't see the central artery and you don't see the tunnels. You just see where you could walk or bike. But the attributes that are used in building paths in this network is simply the length of the links. There's no other conditions added on. You can use it. How long is it? And then the spatial inputs, the zonal data. So as I mentioned before, we're getting socioeconomic data from UrbanSim for the state of Massachusetts. Then for New Hampshire, Rhode Island, we've implemented a population sim, which is an open source population synthesizer, so that we could convert from the control totals that we had at the zonal level that were used prior to TDM23 into that same disaggregate synthetic population that we need for TDM23. We take in school enrollment, either K through 12 grouped together or for college commuters only. The university component only estimates travel for off-campus students. Then we also take in parking costs at the hourly, daily, and monthly level, and those are tied to, we use those different time levels to set the costs by different trip purposes. Home-based work uses the monthly, where at monthly equivalent of at the daily level, whereas a social recreation trip uses hourly times the average duration of that trip. So with all those inputs, TDM23 gets to work and it starts deriving some categories. So the first 3 things that it will derive is the transit access density. So you can think of this as like our area type category. It's the employment and population density, as well as the availability, the accessibility to transit by transit mode and frequency. The intersection density, so that's working with the OpenStreetMap network, and it ends up being a proxy for the walkability or bikeability of an area, and it calculates the employment accessibility. How many jobs can you get to by transit or highway within a certain amount of time, and that feeds into the vehicle availability component. So next up, we need to start estimating some household and worker level attributes. One of the first things we define is we categorize our households by their income. But remember, we're getting a nice continuous income from UrbanSim. We're going to categorize them into low, medium, high by household size, pivoting off of the federal poverty levels. And then that's a useful categorization for several of the models. We also will use the worker income to group them into different categories so that basically weight the employment attractions by our 10 sectors of employment. And that's what's shown on the table here on the slide. We'll estimate the worker commute level, that's essentially our work from home component. And then we'll estimate the vehicles available in the model, for the household. And so the way vehicle availability is estimated, what it produces is essentially one of 3 categories. Either this household has 0 vehicles, this household has fewer vehicles than drivers or insufficient vehicles, or it has sufficient vehicles, at least as many vehicles as drivers. We're not estimating directly the number of vehicles for the household, but it can be derived. It's 0, okay, we are estimating that. Insufficient, is it 1 fewer number of drivers, 2? Sufficient, is that exactly equal number of drivers or more? So it makes that comparison to, say vehicle census data a little, or not as direct, but we can see the relative relationship. So here we have all the different trip purposes in TDM23. These are, I'll say fairly standard, but what I want to highlight here is the level that they're estimated by. So we still operate TDM23 at the disaggregate synthetic population level until distribution. So we are estimating the non-work related household trips, such as personal business, social recreation, school, and non-home based non-work by each household as a trip rate applied. The work-related trips we're estimating for each worker, so the home-based work and non-home-based work. University is estimated at the TAC level. So when we get to distribution, we do have to aggregate, or we do aggregate. And there we define our market segments by vehicle sufficiency. So that's 0 vehicles, insufficient or sufficient vehicles. But for home-based work, we actually also maintain that worker income, so we can do the distribution and use the weights that we defined by employment category. The other trips that are coming into the model are either at the person level for special generators, or our casinos primarily. These can be segmented either into personal business or social recreation, and then airport ground access, which are defined by it being a resident or a visitor, and for business or for leisure. So it ends up being 4 different market segments there. We do take in direct inputs of vehicle trips for externals, whether they're auto trips, medium truck or heavy truck, or internal truck trips, medium heavy. So here are the mode alternatives for the model. Give you a second to take that in. So we have auto modes that are segmented by occupancy: driving alone, shared ride 2, HOV2, and HOV3 plus, our DA, S2, and S3 abbreviations. Those are available to all of the household trips and home-based university. We have 2 non-motorized modes, walking and biking, again, available to all of our household trips. And then 2 types of transit that are for the household side, either auto access or walk access. These are both walk egress. And so that access is at the home end. So it's assuming if you're using an auto, it's between home and the transit parking ride stop. And then you're walking on the other end. And then return home, you walk first, use transit, and then auto to get the rest of the way home. And then we have a ride sourcing mode. So the reason I term ride sourcing to include any kind of TNC as well as taxis all in one. There is a school bus mode for home-based school only, grade school. And I'll just highlight that auto access to transit is not available for non-home-based trips. So essentially, if you're not coming from the home, you're not using a car to get to transit. That followed from what we saw in the household survey pretty clearly. So I just want to highlight airport, our last column here, and you know that it has some overlap. It also has auto access to transit, walk access to transit, and ride source, but it has 4 new modes or different modes that are unique to our airport ground access: the driving and parking, picking up and or dropping off, and that one's important to distinguish because there is an associated vehicle trip to or from, depending on it's a pickup or a drop off. Logan Express, we wanted to distinguish that from just the auto access to transit. I mean, those are trips that are primarily used to get to the airport. So we wanted to separate it out, and also that gives the model more control at calibrating those. And then rental car for those visitors. So just to kind of talk through the flow of the model and how data goes through and may be fed back. So vehicle availability and trip generation, those are our first steps. Those are outside of the speed feedback loop of assignment back up to our demand steps of distribution and mode choice. So we prime those with warm start speeds and park and ride demand conditions. So those warm starts are an output of a previous full model run, and may be advisable to update for your particular scenario. Otherwise, it will use whatever was defined before. Then we go in, distribute the trips, do mode choice, and run the AM and midday assignment for roadway and the AM park and ride assignment on the transit side. And those are fed back. And these were just AM and midday because we're operating in the peak, non-peak time period, production to attraction structure at this point. Then after that converges, we go down to a final assignment. We just run a remaining roadway, PM and night, and all of the transit by time of day and access mode, walk-in or auto, and auto egress. So just to show what we have for air quality and equity metrics, air quality, using the rates from moves, we can produce the carbon dioxide, monoxide, NOx, sulfur dioxide, and VOCs. Equity metrics are kind of organized by, they're calculated in aggregate for population segments of low income and minority populations. And then I'm grouping them by either accessibility metrics, what kind of zonal data, how much of a certain type of zonal attribute can you get to within a certain amount of time by highway or transit, what's the average time by highway transit, and what are the local conditions, like what are the air quality conditions for the environment metrics. So these are all part of TDM23 and calculated every time the model runs. So then finally, the output data. So of course, this can be aggregated any way you like, but I thought I could just tell you how it is at the most disaggregate level, then you can kind of figure out how you might want to aggregate it. So as I mentioned, for each household, we have the number of trips associated with that household by trip purpose, and we have the vehicle availability for that household. For each person, if they're a worker, we have their work-related trips, and we have their commute levels how much they work from home. If we go to the TAC level, and we aggregate all that together, we can see the person and vehicle trips by mode. We can see any truck trips, and we get the equity metrics at the TAC level. Again, then can be aggregated forward. At the link level, we are assigning the user classes of drive alone versus all the shared ride modes as each a user class, and then medium truck and heavy truck. So you have those volumes by each time of day, the congested speeds, and air quality at the link level. And for transit, ons, offs, and loading at the stop and the route, and of course it can be aggregated to whatever your heart desires. And then just a quick survey of some of the reports that we're working on. We're really excited about the new report functionality that's being developed. And you see here as a mix, we are working on a report that will be a single HTML file that's open in any browser, can be shared. So that will contain things like that core diagram you see in the middle, or the polar plot in the bottom right, as well as tables in the bottom left. We have some interactive reports that are in Jupyter Notebooks. But again, it's working in Jupyter Notebooks, so we're going to open source data formats rather than Transcad proprietary formats. So that's looking at stop demands for express route. We have a widget that lets you select different routes and times of day. And then of course, Transcad does what it does very well. So there we have the bandwidth plots, and that will be part of the portfolio of working with TDM23 is leveraging those as well. Just this is more for reference, just all the different estimation and validation data that went into updating, or developing and calibrating and validating TDM23. It's quite a variety. The 2011 household survey was one of the biggest parts of it, and we are hopeful that that will be updated for TDM27, hopefully. But then you can see we also leverage, so many surveys were leveraged, as well as big data, counts, and published conditions, for the GTFS files, but also getting information on TNC fares and parking costs. All right, so that is our walkthrough of the model. And now I'd like to get into kind of the fun part and talking about next steps and how TDM23 will actually shape the future. And we see this in a couple different ways. One, we're thinking about shaping the future of modeling practice. And this is where the exploratory modeling capability really comes in. And so we'll talk a little bit about the work we're doing in exploratory modeling. You'll hear a lot more about that from us in the future. But then I want to talk about our CTPS's role in travel demand modeling and how we're seeing the potential for that to change and how we plan to evolve that. So just briefly on exploratory modeling, I have an image here from FHWA Transportation Model Improvement Program, the transportation planning for uncertain times. If you're not familiar with this report, I highly recommend it. It's an excellent survey and advice on how we can evolve the practice for transportation planning to go from the predict then act, best guess future, okay, let's optimize to that, to these are the decisions we're thinking of making, how do we test them, stress test them for robustness, and then coming up with different approaches based on those findings. But to support that from a modeling perspective, we need a model that is flexible, that can, we can change the parameters and the inputs rapidly and easily and reliably, and that we can run quickly. And so that, again, to go back to the trip-based versus activity-based trade-off, that was one of the big thumbs on the scale to move us into a trip-based model. And I will say, of course, TDM23 is integrated in TMIP EMAT, the exploratory modeling analysis tool, and we're currently running it with that tool now. So some other things that we're working on, I mentioned that interactive summary report. That's the standalone file that should make the model results much more accessible to even the people who don't have Transcad or even a Jupyter notebook. We're working on refining and revising our work from home component. We've been working on that steadily. We're looking at using the new coastal flood data from the Massachusetts Coastal Flood Risk Model, MCFRM, and defining new metrics of overlaying that data with the model. We're looking at the parking price assumption, and is it reasonable to have it's constant dollars, but a constant parking price as new development evolves in our region. And we're looking at refinements that we can make to the parking right capacity component of the model. So to kind of now shift over to our role and that part of the discussion, as Tegan, I think, mentioned highlighted, summarized very well in the welcome remarks, our role historically has been as this exclusive keeper of the travel demand model. CTPS, almost without exception, was the developer, the maintainer, and the applier of the travel demand model. And that had some real advantages of you have this team of people who have then the best knowledge, comprehensive knowledge of the scripts of the model, the inputs to it, and all the applications. However, the risk of that approach is it's constrained to the capacity of that team. And if some new need came up and that team couldn't handle it, it couldn't use the travel demand model. So shifting out of that really opens up and provides, we think, a better way for our community to have access to these tools and to be able to leverage the benefit of these tools. And TDM23 was built to support that. We have been using a version control platform and following version control practice for our versions so far, our beta release and the release to support the LRTP. And we'll continue that so we can always answer the question of what's the latest version and how is it different from what was released previously, which is really necessary to be able to open it up beyond a very exclusive team. As I mentioned, all the new parameters have been re-estimated, the scripts have been redeveloped and documented, and we have the structures documented so other people besides the developers of the model can understand it and interact with it. And it was developed in a way to be modular. So the advantage of that is as it evolves, things can change without breaking or without having to touch many areas of the model. I think of the university component, I highlighted that it's only for off-campus students. Obviously, on-campus students also travel, and I'm sure there are certainly applications we can think of where that would be an important thing to represent in the travel demand model. To replace that home-based university component with something that's more comprehensive, it is a contained area of the model code. So that could be done without disrupting many other steps in the model and therefore supporting continued development. So we're going to be moving from that exclusive keeper to what we're calling as an engaged developer of the model. So not exclusive, meaning TDM23 will be made publicly available. We'll be the developer, we'll continue to set the priorities and lead the development and manage the releases. But we want to stay engaged, right? We want to stay plugged in on the applications. Kind of need to have that in order to be able to set those priorities. And this is where we see that modeling community as the foundation that will support all of these things. We need the community to actually see how we're using the model, how it's being used, is it useful, to help us, as I said, manage the releases and be able to communicate them effectively, and to stay plugged in on the applications. So how do we get there? Well, the next immediate steps on this path is first off to have that more detailed workshop and produce a detailed report that we're calling the Structures, Applications, and Performance Report. This workshop will probably be a half-day workshop, and this report will be hundreds of pages long, as you would expect for the kind of detail that we want to include in it. We're working towards our next release of the model. So what was released for the LRTP is TDM23.0.1. We're working on .1.0, and this will be the release that for applications, essentially. And then to support the public sharing, we want to produce a use agreement, essentially a memo of understanding of this is how the model should be cited. These are the expectations of CTPS of sharing information about how it's used, bug fixes, enhancements, and how you can engage in the community. We also want to make sure we have good user documentation so people can get out there and stand it up. and a way to get access to it. So the support mechanisms is going to be another thing that we need to put in place. We want to make sure that people don't get, sort of stumble right out of the gate, that they have the proper setup and troubleshooting support. But of course, as we get more involved, if it's more of an application guidance role, that may require sort of a contract with CTPS to support that. So some details to work out there. We also see a really valuable thing of kind of coming back to staying plugged in applications and being that focal point. We'd see a great role of CTPS being the archive of applications. So we would guide and advise any of our agency partners, if they are using this model, to capture those inputs and the parameters for any final scenarios and share those with CTPS, and we'll maintain an archive of that. So that's something that can be a great reference for future testing as the model continues to evolve and to see how it has been used in the past. So how are we gonna get there? In the next few seasons we've laid out, we're looking to have that draft report and workshop this winter. It already does feel like winter, so it'll be soon. And the release TDM23.1.0, as well as the draft user documentation. So essentially will be a point where this model will be ready for application. And then the spring, finalizing the use agreements and the mechanisms to be able to share the model out, all the files behind it, as well as, like I said, talk more about exploratory modeling and share the results that we're generating. And then looking forward to this summer where we actually, kind of launch that user group and that community. And that's also when we expect to have the next release of TDM23. If it's a major one, it'll be .2, if not so major, maybe .1, something like that. So thank you. I hope this was informative and valuable to you. As we mentioned, I think in the invitation, these slides will be shared out along with the recording of this presentation. And I definitely want to end on acknowledging the village that has raised this model. In the upper left, the point of pride is the current model development team. We're growing, and we're really happy to have all the folks that are part of that now, as well as some past technical contributors to TDM23, either moved on or from other teams. The current steering committee, we have Bob Fry representing OTP, Connor Gately from MAPC, Len Diggins was on the MPO board, and then Sabi, Sarah, and Rebecca, who are CTPS staff members. And to acknowledge the past members who have contributed to that model steering committee, Ben, Betsy, Ed, Michelle, and Tim. So with that, I think we can go to questions. And please feel free to reach out to me and Sabi, who is the Travel Demand Modeling Program Manager, with any other questions or conversations you want to have for the next workshop. And I think people want to raise hands, or I can try to, I see there's some stuff in the chat. Let's see. A link. Any questions?
No questions, Marty, just to thank you for your presentation and to Tegan as well. And yeah, I put that link in the chat earlier when you were talking about the socioeconomic projections. So we finally have all of that on MassDOT's website. So that's the link to that. We had been talking about that a little bit in the past TMG meetings, and I see Rob Raymond is on here. We'd like to have this presentation again, I think, for the whole data users group. So Rob will be talking to you about that. I see a few other RPA people on here, but frankly, not as many as I had thought or had hoped. So I think it would be very useful to do either this exact presentation or something very similar at an upcoming TMG meeting and DUG meeting as well. But we'll talk about that more later. So yes, so thank you again.
Thanks, Bob. Any other questions or comments? Right.
You know,
Very
we
nice.
always say
Yeah.
silence is tacit agreement, so that's very encouraging.
Well, you know, Marty, normally I would have lots of questions, but I'm on the steering committee, so I get to ask them all there. But great.
That's true.
But yeah, this is still exciting though, even though I knew what was coming. Still very exciting. Can't wait to get my hands on the keyboard.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be at this point where we can share this, this information in detail and see this work start to get out there and make a difference.
Hey, Marty.
Yes.
Hey, it's John.
Hi, John.
I'll just ask a question to, I don't know, keep the ball rolling here. Yeah, could you talk a little bit about your philosophy for the eventual user community? How do you see the user community playing a role in the life of this model?
Yeah, that's a great point, John. And I'm thinking about modeling this on the Florida model has a great user community, and what they have, I think it's quarterly meetings, and they invite different speakers to come and demonstrate applications. So I think a component of that would be really useful, and this could be a mix of applications as well as research. It's certainly, having a TDM23 focus makes a lot of sense, and I think how we could start, but I could also see it kind of broadening out. I think another aspect of this community and those meetings, those user group meetings, would be a review of the priorities for the next release. And so I want to be very open about what we're working on in development and the time frame around that and what we're seeing and what we expect to be able to do and when it will be available. So people can really depend their work on that, as well as, like I said, shape the future of the model. So we're all shaping the future of modeling here with TDM23. I guess that's probably the right way I want to sum up my philosophy of it. So I can really see it as a nice exchange. Again, we have this common platform, but so we can talk about how we're using it, the challenges that we are seeing with it, how we're going to improve it, and then also I think some broader visionary stuff about where we want to see the modeling practice go, and perhaps have examples from other areas brought in.
And I'll add, Marty, because one of the things that me as a person who's not like a professional being in this realm, when I say I'm excited about getting my hands on it, I just kind of want to do a lot of exploratory research, especially on certain parameters that have to do with transit sense. That's my hook into this. So that's what this user looks forward to doing with it and hopefully contributing by doing that.
Absolutely, Len, and that's why that's on our near-term plan, is to share the exploratory modeling that we're doing now. So I think that is how we really reveal the value of these tools. We're not predicting the future, right? We're understanding in this very complex system that we couldn't possibly hold in our heads how all these different assumptions and decisions interact, and give us some insights into that. And the best way to reveal that is to run it across ranges and see those. That's been my experience in doing exploratory modeling. Is it really reveals? It doesn't say like, oh wow, like that's what the future looks like. It's, oh wow, this is how these different things trade off and exchange, and can identify some really important risk areas for us. So I'm also very excited about moving modeling into that space of the planning process. That it's not the black box that we ask a question and it gives us an answer and we try to interpret that answer into something that makes sense. It is along the way, and I think maybe we have a baseline uncertainty for different parameters that we all kind of begin from and test or add to, or it's just we really know what this model can do well and the limitations of TDM23. And that's another big part of my modeling philosophy. This is not the one tool for every job, nor should it be. I think, another maybe area for this model users group can be, where do we need to bring in complementary tools? I will leave the door open for an activity-based model even, if the needs demand it and justify it, absolutely, we should have that. Any other questions or comments? Thank you everyone for the kind words that you're putting in the chat. Really appreciate that. Okay, I think with that, we will close this webinar, and I guess I'll say for that next workshop, please reach out directly to me and Sabi, and if you're interested and you want to be on that list, and we'll work towards scheduling that in the winter. All right, thanks everybody. Have a great day.